Welcome, everybody. Um, we'll give a moment for everyone to join, and then I'll hand it over. If you've been on a previous webinar, you might have seen me wearing my Give Back Yoga hat as co-executive director of Give Back Yoga Foundation. On today's webinar, I'm taking off that hat and I'm going to put on my founder of Eat, Breathe, Thrive hat, founder and director of Eat, Breathe. I'm a guest on today's webinar, but I want to welcome you all and thank you all for joining. And I'm going to hand it over to our host today, our moderator, Melanie Taylor, to get us started.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie Taylor. I'm the Director of Education at Eat, Breathe, Thrive. I'm really happy to welcome you to this webinar that is hosted by the Give Back Yoga Foundation. For the past 15 years, the Give Back Yoga Foundation has been helping people bring yoga to individuals in prisons, hospitals, schools, and communities in need. Give Back Yoga University offers online courses, conferences, and comprehensive degree program to help yoga teachers and yoga therapists work with students facing addiction, cancer, eating disorders, incarceration, and PTSD. The Give Back Yoga University is launching several courses this year, and today we are talking in particular about the course on eating disorders and how yoga can support prevention and recovery. I'm very happy to introduce our two speakers today, my dear friend Chelsea Roth, the founder and director of Eat, Breathe, Thrive, who, as you know, wears many hats. At Eat, Breathe, Thrive, we are a nonprofit organization that aims to prevent and help people overcome eating disorders. And we do that through yoga, providing skills and resources for mindful eating, emotional resilience, and positive embodiment. And Chelsea is joined today by my new friend, Terry Prinster, who is the founder and director of Yoga for Cancer, another founding program at the Give Back Yoga Foundation. Terry is lead faculty on a course coming up in July on oncology yoga. All of the courses are open for registration now, and you'll be receiving more information on the courses by email and on the start dates and how to get registered. So I'm so excited to have Chelsea and Tari here today to have a conversation we don't often hear in the yoga world, because so often we're seeing that suffering happens in independent silos. Like we work with eating disorders, or we work with cancer, or we work with incarceration, but we'd be remiss to forget that we're working with people that are often facing multiple challenges. So without further ado, let's jump into some of your questions. So this question is for both of you. Has any association been found between eating disorders and cancers?
Well, Chelsea, why don't you give it a start? And unless you want me to.
I can give it a start, and I want you to answer this in depth, Tari. And for those of you, well, I'll just share. We were having a heated discussion about this just before this webinar began, which is part of why we're laughing. The one thing I'd say right off the bat is I think there's a myth that eating disorders cause cancer, and that myth has been around for a long time. I'll let Tari give you the kind of more detailed information, but cancer is so widespread. We were just discussing cancer affects 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women, and eating disorders I think affect 70 million people worldwide. So of course there's crossover, but I think the thing to understand is that this is not a getting a little bit of background noise. Just help us with noise. Thank you. There's certainly crossover between these two issues, but one does not lead to another. And I think the really interesting intersection that both Tari and I are interested in is knowing that people with eating disorders will develop cancer, and knowing that people who have cancer or undergoing treatment for cancer are likely to have also struggled with disordered eating at some point in their life, or those treatments may affect the way that they eat, or those cancer and its treatments may affect how they feel with their body. My interest as a yoga therapist is how do we support people that are dealing with these two issues simultaneously. The only thing I've seen in the research, and I'll hand it again to Tari to kind of speak more about this, is that there's some eating disorders, namely Bulimia is the one you see most often cited in the research that are accompanied by behaviors that may lead to cancer. And I'm thinking specifically with bulimia with purging and vomiting. There's sometimes a correlation between that and esophageal cancer, but it's certainly not a, if you have esophageal cancer, it's because you had an eating disorder. And I think that's a really important myth to dispel and understand. Tari.
Okay, well, historically, we have, as the human race, wanted to find causes for our suffering, whether we were suffering from an eating disorder or a cancer. We are automatically want to point at what caused it. For, I think, a couple of reasons. One, it's a lot easier to blame something and understand it, understand what's happening to you when you have something to blame. And one of the things in terms of cancer has over the years been that to blame, to pass judgment on something that caused my cancer would be to say what I eat, because then that becomes something I can control. And that's really, if I can control what I eat, then maybe I won't get cancer. And I certainly followed that path. Before I was diagnosed with cancer, I thought, oh, I'm going to eat right. And that will give me control over whether or not I ever get cancer. And I did. I ate very, very well, and followed all of the prescriptions that are out there. Were out there 20 years ago when I was diagnosed and before, and are still out there. Control the amount of, primarily sugar, that sugar cause cancer. So, somewhere along the line, these kinds of myths got generated. And since those myths about what causes cancer, we've done a lot of research. And surprisingly, what has come up in recent years is that, we really now can identify, fortunately, what causes cancer. And even though what you eat and sugar are an influencer, if you want to use a popular term, but it doesn't cause it, but it influences cancer. Cancer starts inside of you with a rogue cell in a cell that has gone bad. So I think that the difficulty in saying that an eating disorder can then lead to cancer or cause a specific kind of cancer needs so much more research, and there really is not any research that says, in particular, an eating disorder, bulimia causes esophageal cancer. There's no research that says that specifically. Certainly, eating is linked to influencing someone who already has a rogue cell in their body to encourage that. Just like an influencer in social media does. It encourages you to go out and buy that dress or whatever. So the research is poor around all of the connection between cancer and eating disorders. And as Chelsea says, there are people who have eating disorders and then develop cancer. But the causality is not necessarily the eating disorder. On the other side of that coin, there are people with cancer who develop eating disorders. And sometimes that can be a result of the cancer diagnosis, that people will become overly conscientious and overly concerned about their eating. So that might lead to an eating disorder. So one doesn't necessarily cause the other, but they can lead to.
Yeah, I've actually crossed out some of the questions because the two of you answered them, this prevalence between the two and which one comes first. And I think the answer is that depends on the individual and their own experience. And so the next question that I have here, it's kind of leading into what we've been talking about. It's surprising, because as you said, we were talking about it before we hopped on the call together. Is there a preventative method or diet or any kind of information that would have the least amount of digestive issues? Since the symptoms are very personal, this can vary immensely. So what would you suggest is the best information to give to a patient?
Well, I think the best thing I'll jump in, Chelsea. A couple of things. This question is a little, I want to refine it just a little bit. The association of indigestion or nausea as a result of cancer treatments is well known. So I want to focus on that, which might be why the question was asked, to see what the intersection between eating disorders and cancer might be. Yes, nausea is dramatically linked to cancer treatments, not to cancer itself, but to the treatments. And it's a really simple explanation. When one is looking at these rogue cells in the body and prescribed chemotherapy, the task of chemotherapy is to kill fast-growing cells, because that's what a cancer is. Cancer is a fast-growing, multiplying cell in the body that is, and so chemotherapy examines and looks at all, well, and there are some cells in the body that grow faster than other cells. For example, our hair, the cells of our hair reproduce very, very quickly. So that is why people get bald. The cancer doesn't make you bald. It's the cancer treatment, the chemotherapy, that makes you lose your hair. Likewise, and this is sort of making people aware of what cancer treatments do, is looking for fast reproductive cells. You may not know, but the lining of your stomach is a cell in your body that reproduces itself. In other words, it dies off and reproduces itself every 10 days. So chemotherapy goes right to that and begins to kill off all of the lining of your stomach. And that's what causes the nausea. Not what you eat, not what you don't eat, but that's where the nausea is from. So to prescribe a diet that, or something to eat that is going to prevent that, ain't going to work. And I would say that in any case, the crossover between cancer and eating disorders would be to understand what is causing that in the body in terms of cancer, and not related to something that you have eaten that is causing the nausea. So I don't know, Mel, I kind of redirected that question because I thought there was some misassociations that, you know, anyway.
Chelsea?
Oh, thank you. I couldn't unmute myself there for a moment. I thought that was incredibly informative, Tori, and I don't have much to add. I imagine, you know, I think mine will be a standard answer, which is I don't generally recommend that yoga teachers or yoga therapists make any type of nutritional dietary recommendations to their students, which I know sounds really kind of like institutional, like, you know, don't you do that. But what I mean is just with, it's not really our scope of practice. If you're a nutritionist or a dietitian, maybe, but that's beyond our scope of practice. And the only thing I'd add is that dieting is a huge risk factor for eating disorders. So when a person goes on a diet, oftentimes, like, that's one of the biggest triggers for eating disorders, is a diet of any kind. So I'm not saying, you know, a person can't eat healthier, but diets in particular are big risks for eating disorders. So I would just steer away from making recommendations about diets. Um, and I found, Tori, I didn't know that about chemotherapy targeting the lining of the stomach. That's fascinating, and a good kind of maybe more compelling reason, maybe not to make those types of suggestions.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I thank you, Chelsea, for saying that. Yes, as yoga teachers and yoga therapists, unless you are a trained nutritionist and put on that hat, speaking of hats, put on the hat of nutrition, we as yoga teachers and therapists do not wear that hat and make recommendations. On the other hand, I would want to say, if you are seeking to be an oncology yoga teacher and work in that field and are working in the field of oncology currently, that understanding where the nausea is coming from is really important for a yoga teacher and therapist. And that is what in the course that I am leading for Give Back Yoga University is all about. Those are some of the critical points that I think need to be known and understood by a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, oncology yoga teacher.
Thank you both. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat box about this not being scope of practice. So I think our listeners are right there with you. And so I've got a question that might lead us into, okay, how do we support this? Tari, there's a question here for you. Can you speak to the need of maintaining a healthy weight for cancer survivors post-treatment?
Post-treatment. Okay, so one of the other misunderstandings about cancer treatments is that you lose weight and that you and it's more likely, in fact, the data supports that it's more likely that you will gain weight rather than lose weight. And cancer is something that has various stages. And certainly weight loss when you are in a late stage cancer or even terminal cancer at end stage, weight loss is very, very important because it can lead to other morbidities. But the one thing that we do know about cancer is that more people survive it than die of it. So it is more likely you're going to complete treatments and gain weight rather than complete treatments and lose weight. Not everybody, but more likely. Now, completing treatments and gaining weight and then maybe having to continue on treatments that allow you to, what we do know and what there is concrete evidence is that obesity is a contributing factor to, it is one of the influencers of cancer. So if you have gained weight and are continuing to gain weight and get into that arena of being categorized as obese, then the dangers of developing a cancer increase. So I don't know, Mel, did I answer the question?
I think that I can speak. I can kind of piggyback on what you said a little bit and jump off because it's so interesting doing these. I was just reflecting on doing these webinars between kind of populations that are often siloed. One of the neat and really, I think, fascinating things when we come together and have conversations is we encounter different language and ways of talking about things. So I just kind of, it'll be an interesting conversation between us, Tari. One challenge in the eating disorder space is around what's often talked about as weight stigma, and kind of there's a lot of conversation that's happening right now, and I think it's a positive thing in research and in healthcare for eating disorders around BMI and the problems with BMI as a way of assessing health. And even these kind of categories that have become so deeply woven in our language, in healthcare, in kind of general culture of obese, or the war on obesity and morbid obesity and all of that. There's a real movement, and I think it's a positive one, of unpacking what that term means, and how there's kind of an assumption that if you're in this quote category of obesity, then it's the obesity that leads to poor health outcomes, and that obesity is bad. So one of the kind of weird statistics, or not statistics, facts I love to point people to, is at the height of his, the peak of his athletic performance, Arnold Schwarzenegger was considered morbidly obese by BMI. And obviously he's not what you would imagine as like obese, but because BMI is a height weight ratio, he would have been classified as obese. So there's a movement, it's called the Health at Every Size movement. And I take issue with some aspects of this movement, but I think the most important finding here is that it's not the obesity necessarily that leads to the poor health outcomes, but the health behaviors that are often correlated with obesity. That's what the research is showing. So it's the sedentary lifestyle, it's what I would call disordered eating behaviors, of eating way past fullness, and that's often correlated. It might be correlated with what we've called obesity on a BMI scale, but I think it's actually what we need to disentangle is that idea that people at higher weight bodies are necessarily unhealthy, because there's a lot of time, there's a lot of people that are at higher weight bodies that are not necessarily unhealthy. So I want to bring that up. I think it's really fascinating. There's a lot of nuance there. So I'm not in any way saying that those are not problems, and that I actually do take issues with this idea that no matter health at every size, what I'm trying to disentangle is this idea that it's the size that leads to dishealth. It's not actually, I don't see the body as being the problem. And I think maybe it's useful to think more expansively around how we think of health. I don't think kind of a height to weight ratio is a great way to measure it. And I don't think, I think there's even some problems with kind of our, there's been some really interesting research on people in higher weight bodies that has found that how do I put this in I'm trying to summarize it really quickly. There's, in some parts of the world, you're more likely to be in a higher weight body. So there's this kind of entanglement of culture and even racism with it. So a lot of our BMI scales and our measures of health have been really focused on a white Western body. Whereas there's often, places in the world where people tend to have higher BMIs, and those BMIs are actually associated with longer life. So some really, really interesting books and articles that have been written on it. I hope I haven't gone way off. Sorry, I want to hear what you're about that. That was part of what
I mean, yeah, there's a healthy weight and an unhealthy weight, but I agree with you entirely that the whole BMI thing has kind of gotten out of control, and that's not the way that we are making a judgment as to whether someone is healthy or not healthy. You're absolutely right. I want to just go back and say I use the word obesity, and kind of put that out there. And we have to be very, very careful about words as we get more and more the intersection of these silos. And obesity is a real trigger word, and I used it first. And what I want to go back and correct is that in saying that finishing gaining weight might lead to obesity, and what we do know, and there is research that shows that those who are in that category of having a high BMI and being categorized as obese, that it's not the obesity that causes cancer. The obesity becomes, and I think this is what Chelsea was saying too, the obesity, that category then becomes an influencer because is grounded in bad eating habits and bad lifestyle habits, and it is an influencer. It influences the future risk of a cancer. It does not cause cancer. So I want to be really, really careful about that. BMI is not associated with, if you have a high BMI, that's going to cause your cancer. No, it could influence it, and all of the other things that Chelsea said, because of lifestyle, sedentary lifestyle, eating habits. Hey, and our big
Yeah, we sorry to interrupt you. Lifestyle eating habits, but also, I mean, what's coming up for me is thinking about access to healthy food as well, right? There's, I think sometimes there's a demonization of people that are in higher weight bodies, or people that are, considered, not having an unhealthy lifestyle. But often when you kind of pull back the veil on that, what you see is that there's so many people in many countries, I was going to say in the states, but also all over the world, that don't have access to healthy food. So there's food insecurity underneath that as well. Like there's just layer upon layer upon layer, and I think what saddens me and troubles me, and I try to bring to the lens of my work, is that so often we and I think it's because sometimes we're so disconnected from it in the yoga world. There's just this demonization of people in higher weight body, or maybe not demonization of like, oh, well, they must be unhealthy if they're in a higher weight body, or they must be living a sedentary lifestyle, or all of that. There's this, it's really complex, because sometimes that is a factor, right? And sometimes a person's lifestyle, maybe it's smoking, maybe it's access to healthy food, maybe it's lack of physical exercise, maybe that does increase one's risk for cancer. But there's also so many people that are I guess there's another layer of people that might be in higher weight bodies and not actually more at risk of cancer. And then there's another layer of people that might be in higher weight bodies, not because they're lazy or sedentary or any of that thing, but because they've, genetics, because of food, like access to healthy foods, because of metabolic issues. So there's so much complexity there.
And,
Well,
and
there's
that's
a lot of
where we come in. That's where we come in, because that's where we as yoga teachers and yoga therapists come in, because that's part of our job, is helping people who don't have access to food and exercise, which is the two things that the American Cancer Society and the Department of Health and Human Services says. It's those two things. It's those two things that you can, do something about. You can take control. So we teach yoga for people of size so that they can do something healthy for themselves. This is where the yoga comes in. We bring about awareness of what you eat and what the sources of eating are. And I mean, that's what, Eat, Breathe, Thrive is all about, right?
Yeah. No, I do. Go for it, Mel.
Yeah, I'm going to pull two questions together that are exactly where you two are going. So I'm going to read the first one and then ask the second one. I'm a colon cancer survivor and more recently diagnosed follicular lymphoma. I am struggling with guilt if I want a cookie or have a glass of wine or something that I should not eat due to sugar content. Do others have issue with this? The answer is yes. I can answer that one. So I'm going to bring it to this other question. Meaningful nutrition is usually a huge part of cancer care strategy, as is working with eating disorders. That's my add-in. Can you please share advice on how to comfortably cultivate the importance of self-care and self-worth when supporting someone with cancer and an eating disorder? And I'm going to add into that an additional question that talks about that through an interoceptive practice.
Do you want to go first, Tari?
Well, I think that this is where the real important work of a yoga practice comes in, is it gives us tools. It gives us really concrete tools. And the one we start with it. I mean, almost I don't care what silo you're in. I think that in every silo, the yoga teacher starts with awareness. And most likely it is breath awareness. And I think that that's where yoga becomes so successful, is that it breaks down all of the complexities and gives us concrete tools. And if you can't exercise self-regulation yourself, or you're suffering because you are not able to do self-regulation, then you come to us for help. You come to a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist for help, and the yoga teacher will start there. Let's just sit and be aware of our breath. And when we can do that, then we are beginning to teach these self-regulating habits of recognizing what's going on in the body. So I don't know, I'm all about bringing it down to the yoga. And I would say that that is also true in when someone who's suffering with cancer. We have to start somewhere. It's pretty overwhelming to be diagnosed with cancer. And then I'm hoping that this person who's diagnosed with colon cancer has been treated well and is in recovery. But even after you are in recovery, well into recovery, even 20 years into recovery, there still has to be awareness of, you're still going to get things that will come up. Like I always use the example of the pain in my left big toe. Oh God, the cancer is back. And now what do I do about it? And regulating myself to understand that, we can take control of that and do something about it. We don't have to give into that anxiety that the cancer is back. So I don't know, again, Mel, did I answer the question, or am I leading off in a different category?
No, you absolutely did. And I think what you're adding, Tari, is the nuance. There's so much involved here. It's not one simple answer. And I think that's the conversation we're having today. So thank you for highlighting that so beautifully. Chelsea, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought those two questions together, because I just was talking about the guilt and shame and kind of maybe the rumination they were feeling about eating after their diagnosis. And I was just thinking that could have been said by any one of my eating disorder clients that doesn't have cancer. There's so much similarity there. One thing I see with eating disorder clients often is that rumination and a real obsession and focus on the food, and like, what did I eat, or what am I going to eat, or there's just an almost an obsession with food, especially for those with restrictive eating disorders, an obsession of what I ate or how many calories I'm going to take in. And I had an eating disorder myself for the young person. That's part of what's drawn me to this work. And informed by that experience, my own experience, my understanding of that has always been that there's a sort of like general state of anxiety in the body, and often that's after trauma or just life happening, and we want something concrete to kind of lock into. The mind kind of looks for something concrete, and often food is kind of a vessel for that. So there's this general state of anxiety and rumination, and it's like now the mind just locks onto food and obsesses about that. So as Tari said, I think one of the most valuable aspects of yoga is that is giving a person the ability to become aware of their own mind and the habits and the fluctuations of one's own mind. It was one of the most empowering things for me early in my recovery. I often said it was, instead of being in this vehicle of my mind that was going all over the road, and I'm in the back seat, I'm like, why is this car going all over the place? recognizing that it was my car and that I had an ability to get into the driver's seat and direct it a little bit through the vehicle of my body, through the vehicle of my breath. And that was incredibly empowering. And also, not taking my mind so seriously. So that loosened up that obsession with food. And I see that happen. I think that's, if you're a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, it's working with any student that's got that kind of anxiety or rumination of food, I would stop, I wouldn't, it's so tempting to go, oh, well, can I make a nutritional recommendation here? Or can I just reassure the person they haven't eaten that much? Get off the food, get away from the food. Like the lens that helps me is knowing that the anxiety is in the body. And so the best thing I can do is to loosen that connection, is give that person a practice that allows them to generate awareness of their own mind and create a little bit of space there. So breath awareness is a wonderful practice. That's what Tari spoke to. My big three that I use a lot, the kind of trifecta in our programs that we use in Eat, Breathe, Thrive, are grounding, orienting, and resourcing. So becoming aware of your connection with the ground. You can do it literally right in this moment, noticing where your seat connects with something beneath you, like orienting, noticing where you are in time and space, resourcing, coming to a connection with something that brings you a state of peace or ease, maybe a memory of someone you love, or just imagining your favorite place on the planet. So all of those things are good for that. That's my kind of.
And this also might lead to, Mel, forgive me if I'm jumping to another question or whatever, but what Chelsea is saying leads to another intersection of cancer and eating disorders, which has to do with, and maybe I'm just using a different term than Chelsea did, self-blame, that I caused my cancer, that I caused my eating disorder. And this is certainly one of the, I think, kind of dangers in and around the yoga world. That if the yoga teacher and the yoga is done right, can avoid that danger. But some of the misinterpretations of the yoga principles of and I find it strongly in the yamas and the niyamas, but that I caused my cancer, that I caused my suffering, and that I'm the one to blame. That is something that we have to be very careful. And I think one of the reasons why we do have Give Back Yoga University is to train away from that kind of yogic thinking. We are not going to cause. You're not going to cause a recurrence of your colon cancer if you eat that chocolate chip cookie. You are not. And you're also, not going to necessarily disrupt your path to better, healthier eating by having one chocolate chip cookie. So, we have to, we have to preach modulation and how to be moderate in our, and definitely to not self-blame. It would be nice if I had something out there in the environment that I could blame for causing my cancer. But I can't.
Yeah. So there's a question that really ties into this, and I think it's a really important one to discuss. Whether it's eating disorders or working with cancers or human beings in general, I think, do you recommend focusing on body neutrality rather than body acceptance, especially in the beginning of the practice?
I want to take on this one. Yes, whoever submitted that question, I'm so grateful for this question. I think in the yoga space, I don't, or maybe it's not just the yoga space, maybe it's the health and wellness space over the past 10 years generally. There's been this real focus on body positivity, love your body. And there's even a kind of a strange movement on social media these days of body, like this body positivity has taken the shape of, we used to kind of cringe at people posting pictures of their body when they were thin, and then there was this thinspiration, and then there was fitspiration, and now there's a whole nother brand of it, but it's all this body positivity. I don't find that particularly helpful in my work with eating disorders. I don't find the external message, well, you just need to love your body, or, oh, your body is so beautiful, or take a deep breath in and appreciate the beautiful body you have. I've never found that. I've never found that helpful in my experience. I found it actually counterproductive in working with people with eating disorders, because it's just dissonant from the internal experience that they're having, and no amount of soft yoga talk, soft voice yoga speak is going to change that experience. So I found it unhelpful in that way, but then it's also unhelpful in another way. And this has been something that's only recently informed my work. Like I wasn't aware of this until probably the past couple years. Um, there's for individuals who are experiencing gender dysphoria, or people who are not feeling at home in the gender that they're in, or people who are trans or on anywhere on the gender identity spectrum, one of the things they have shared is that kind of body positive messaging doesn't feel great for them either. And so there's been a real movement toward body neutrality. And I would actually add to this person's question a focus on body functionality. And that's been an interesting theme that's popped up in the research on eating disorders, is that focusing on what the body does, appreciating what the body does for you, how it allows you to hug your children, pet your dogs, go outside and walk in the sun, paint, do anything, do a handstand if that's within your capacity. All of those things, those functions, but focusing on that is often what leads to an abating of eating disorder, the kind of body image insecurities that come with eating disorders. And folks in the trans community have also said that's really helpful for them, this focus on body functionality. So that's something really practical you can incorporate in your work as a yoga teacher or yoga therapist. I couldn't think of a better kind of body exercise that gives us an opportunity to appreciate the body for functionality than yoga, right? There's so many opportunities in a yoga practice to notice what your body is doing for you in any given moment. And that I've seen really work with people, especially when they're struggling with really difficult body image challenges. Not this like, oh, your body is beautiful. And the last thing I'll say is that focus on your body is beautiful. Oh my gosh, do we really want to create this temporal, this attachment to this body that's going to change throughout one's lifetime, right? So it's like your body is beautiful now, but oh, I felt beautiful 10 years ago, but now I just think that focus on body image is so counterproductive. We could, all kinds of things. And there's probably, Tari, and with cancer treatments, all kinds of things that can happen to our body image. You can lose your hair in cancer treatments. Your body can change shape. You can lose parts of your body in cancer treatments. So focusing on image and beauty and all of that just seems very counterintuitive or counterproductive.
I love that, Chelsea, throwing in functionality. I think that really shifts it to, in terms of cancer, I would say that body neutrality discussions are a little skewed in a little different direction. And you're right, Chelsea, to put functionality in there. You lose a body part, you lose an ability to do something that is a normal human function. I think what we try to do as yoga teachers in oncology is to focus on what you still can do, and that um, I want to relate to what you said about losing body parts, because certainly the most significant one, and culturally what just has been so damaging, is in terms of breast cancer. And the trauma that one suffers when they are told they have breast cancer, and the identification in our culture with breasts and breast size, and all of that. We all know it. I don't need to repeat it or even redefine it or point anything to it, but it is very traumatizing. And I just want to relate an incident that happened to me just this week, which is a friend of mine who I go walking with very frequently, and she's had 3 breast cancer diagnoses in the 4 years that I have known her. And she had nice boobs and nice breasts. She opted to go flat, and not only with the breasts that had cancer in it, but she went back 6 weeks later and had the other breast taken off so she wouldn't be lopsided. And she's been cured. I didn't say that word. I didn't say cure. She has been recovered and is healed in the sense that she showed up at my front door 2 days ago with this little skinny tank top on, flat chested, and saying, "Oh, this is so wonderful. I'm so cool. I don't have to wear a bra anymore. Isn't this great?" And I thought that was, if we had more of that attitude towards, and that's the attitude that we have to bring to cancer patients and survivors. I see so many people who do get breast implants and reconstruction who then suffer that, they go bad or they have to have them redone or whatever. So, there's so much of this that is in our culture that tells us what we think we should look like. And it's a danger.
Thank you both. I think for this whole conversation, we've been touching on all these challenging things people experience between the body shame, the relationship with food, the relationship with diagnosis, etc. And one thing that comes out of all of that, and it's been mentioned in the chat box, is how that can cause isolation and shame and pull us in when what we need most, in many cases, is community, to have ourselves validated. So can you speak a little bit about the positives of how we can create a safe and inclusive yoga environment?
Yeah, I'll just briefly, I might go first just so I can weave this in from the chat. Dr. Jennifer Webb, who's one of my favorite researchers in, in this space, happens to be here today, and just mentioned to your point about inclusive, and then our conversation we've just had about body functionality. Dr. Webb, said that there's also nuance to understand about an expansive understanding of body functionality that is not exclusively based on being able-bodied. So I loved that, and I just want to mention that body functionality, so often it comes out of my own mouth, I could say, well, I appreciate my body because I can walk outside, but of course not everyone has that ability. And body function, the understanding of body functionality we want to have is not just physical functionality, not just, I have breasts or I can walk, but I think we focus in Eat, Breathe, Thrive on 5 dimensions of functionality. So cognitive functionality, what does your body allow you to think about? What is emotional, social, creative? So it can be expansive. To your question, Mel, about community and isolation, isolation is one of the biggest triggers and exacerbators of eating disorders and mental health issues of all kinds. It was why I think one of the reasons we saw such a huge increase of eating disorders during the pandemic, that we're still, dealing with the fallout from. And when people who I know who don't practice yoga are kind of like puzzled that I run a nonprofit that does eating yoga for eating disorders, like, it's usually, do this tip to the side. and I try to explain why it's so valuable. One of the things I always point out about yoga is that it's 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 this, often when you're in the middle of an eating disorder or any mental health struggle, it's like yes, it's driven by isolation, but you're driven to isolate more in the midst of those feelings. And I'm sure this is true of cancer as well. If you get depressed and you don't, the more depressed you are, the less you want to go out. And getting over that hump hump of like, all this, you're isolating because you're struggling, and then the more isolated you are, the worse it gets. And getting over that hump of just getting out and going over and seeing a friend or seeing anybody can feel massive. And one of the things I love about yoga, in addition to all of the practical ways that it can help with eating disorder and mental health challenges, is that you can walk into a space with other people and not say a word and connect and have that embodied experience of connection without even talking to another human and getting chills. The magic we found during the pandemic at our organization, we, for the first time, started offering courses online to people with severe eating disorders, which we'd never done because I felt like that was so delicate and fragile. And so now we were offering these courses online. There'd be 10 or 15 people, and they didn't even leave their own house. And it was still palpable, that feeling of connection, of moving and breathing, different than it would have been in a room. But it's that's one of the reasons this practice is so valuable, is that connection without even having to say anything. And I see it happen over and over again. And it's a big deal, especially when a person has a hard time leaving their home, to have a place that they can come and connect with others and maybe not have to say a lot, but they can breathe and move and do something good for themselves and good for their bodies and mental health, and have those moments of connection. In person, it's even better because you can feel people around you, breathe and hear the sound of breath if you're able to hear or see other people. But it's profound and really beneficial. Sorry.
Uh, well, cancer is, by its very nature, isolating, because everybody's cancer is unique and different. No cancer is the same, because no person is the same. And I have organized cancer in awareness in 3 different categories. The first time you hear the word "you have cancer," your whole world shuts down, and it is only you. I think in a self-protective nature, sort of feel like you're the only one in the world with cancer, because it's your cancer, and your cancer isolates you, and that's kind of a natural, normal feeling to have happen first on. Um, the other thing about being diagnosed with cancer, and I don't know how many of you have been or that are on this webinar here today, but certainly it falls into 2 categories of people who have cancer, want everybody to know they have cancer, and very clearly another category where you have been diagnosed with cancer and you never tell anybody. Because as soon as you say, "I have cancer," you know what happens? Everybody tells you what to do. Everybody says. They don't really turn it around and say, how are you feeling? They say, "Oh yeah, my Aunt Louise had that kind of cancer, and my cousin so-and-so," and it's them, and it's not you. So you isolate yourself. So the isolation factor is natural in the beginning, but then you begin to kind of isolate yourself so you don't get that reaction. And I think that that's really important for an oncology yoga teacher to understand, that you know, it's a delicate balance as to whether people are going to talk about it and be incessantly talking about it and obsessed with talking about their cancer, or those who are shy, and how to handle them differently and appropriately. Cancer is, by its very nature, isolating, but then too, we protect ourselves in various ways. I also want to say another thing about, yoga and yoga teachers, and just bring up the fact how this conversation, and I'm peeking at the chat box a little bit. It's hard for me to keep up with all of it and talk, but that being a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, is also very isolating. And this is one of the magics of this kind of intersection here, is that we are hearing and seeing and talking and getting lots of, yeah, that's what yoga is all about. And it's great that we can be, break out of our silos and talk about these things as yoga teachers. So I just wanted to give a thumbs up, hurrah, for Give Back Yoga University.
Well, thank you both. I'm cognizant of the fact that there are questions in the chat box that we will not be able to answer today. And I think that prompts me to talk to you about these courses. I had the pleasure of being at Omega in New York and witnessing these courses be filmed for all the fun, the fly, and the good that went through that. And that's an inside joke. That would bring some lightness to the conversation. So I want to share a couple things with you. First off, thank you very much for attending. There are some other courses like this, these free webinars coming. Chelsea and Nikki Myers of Y12SR will be giving a free webinar in June, and they'll be talking about addiction and eating disorders and how those work together. And then in July, we have Tari and Bill Brown of the Prison Yoga Project that'll be talking about cancer and incarceration. And the big thing I want to leave you with, why I'm sharing it last, is you'll be receiving an email today that gives you a coupon for 50% off of the course that we talked about today for yoga and eating disorder recovery. And it's only available to participants of this webinar. And so it'll be available for 24 hours. I can see that Chelsea has shared with you the link to all of those events, so you can go take a look at what some of those other courses are coming. And also, if you sign up for our Give Back Yoga Foundation membership before April 30th, you'll receive the Conversations at the Conversation at the Intersection of Yoga and Healing course for free. It's an incredible course. Again, I got to witness them all being filmed, and these conversations, I have to share, were the most rich for me. So maybe Chelsea and Tari, are there any final words that you wanted to say as we close out today?
I'm laughing, Danielle. You're right. April 30th has passed. That was
thank you. I'm just reading.
But it was a really great. It was a really great offer, and but you can't. I think if you becoming a member of Give Back Yoga is just making a recurring donation of $10 or more a month, and you can get, I think, up to 20% off on courses. And yeah, that Conversations at the Intersections course is available now. Last month, Give Back Yoga University launched a course on yoga and incarceration. My course launches and opens today, and Tari's course it's open for registration now, so you can register now, but the class is actually open in mid-July. You have to check that link for the exact date. But I just want to say thank you for being such a fantastic moderator, Melanie. I know Tari and I are fiery panelists, and we've got lots to say, and we have really big conversations when we're together. So you held a great container. And Tari, I loved chatting with you, and I had just a wonderful time. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Chelsea, for including me. And yes, Mel, you did a wonderful job of moderating our energies. Lots of but I only want to add that as yoga teachers and yoga therapists, which I saw in the chat box, but I wasn't able to read them all, that, you know, as yoga teachers and yoga therapists, we never stop learning. And this is so important to keep that it is not, yoga itself is evolving and will continue to evolve. And as long as we can have these conversations and keep learning, we're going to make the lives of many who suffer and those who come to us because they are suffering, we're going to make their lives a little bit easier. So thank you for including me, and I hope to see you in my course.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. See you at the next one.